Trigger nodes start workflows. They can be anything from a manual run to something that is scheduled on a daily cadence, to an action in another app like adding a row in Google Sheets or Airtable, or even started from another workflow. This video is going to cover 9 different types of n8n triggers and give you ideas on how you can start your next workflows. And before I start going over all these types of triggers, I do want to let you know if you need any help with your n8n workflows or builds, I am taking on customers. Make sure to hit up my link down below, take you to my website. With that out of the way, let's jump in n8n and cover the basics behind n8n triggers. All right, guys, I have n8n loaded. My goal is to go over a lot of different common triggers for you guys. Now, I can't cover everything, quite frankly. Like, first off, there's a ton of different apps that you can connect to in n8n, and sometimes those apps are going to have 20 plus triggers. So, impossible task to go through all of those for you guys. That would be like at least a 60-hour video. So, what we're going to do is go over like different types of triggers. And, as technology changes, there could be more triggers that are added into n8n, right? And so this is still quite new. So if you're watching this video in a few years in the future, right? If I'm missing something, well, that's the reason why. So, the first thing I want to talk about is like how you can actually identify a trigger. Now, it should be known that, again, triggers start workflows. So when you go over a trigger node like this, you'll see over here, it says execute workflow. You'll see this like lightning icon, which if I go over here, it disappears for execute workflow. And then you can see that this is rounded all across over here. Now this is different than some of the other stuff that you'll find, right? If I go over here and now you go to sheets, right? You'll see if I go on this side of things and let's just say I clear sheet, you'll get this, right? And you can just tell right away the differences between both, right? They both can connect to something here on the right. This one can't on the left, whereas this one can't, right? I can connect this over here, but I can't connect something on the back side of this execute workflow. Okay. Now, the other thing is like, how do you find triggers? And there's a lot of different ways that you could do that, right? So I would say open the nodes panel over here and just search trigger, right? And you can see since I've added triggers, there's add another trigger. And you get some of these over here. So trigger manually on app event, on a schedule, webhook call, form submission, when executed by another workflow, chat message, when running an evaluation, or other ways, right? Or what you can do too, if you have an app that you want to test and see if there's a trigger of some sort. Let's say we want to go to Google Sheets, right? You click over here and you go down below and you see it has 3 triggers, right? On row added, on row updated, on row added, or updated. And again, this is going to be different across the board for everything, right? Another really common one is going to be HubSpot. So we go over here to HubSpot, and this is what I'm talking about. It's impossible to cover everything because you go into HubSpot, right? There's a lot of stuff that deals with HubSpot. Look, 18 triggers for HubSpot. It's a lot. So again, no chance we cover all of those in the video for your specific needs. Okay, so let's cover the most common ones, right? And the first one is going to be the manual trigger. And it says when clicking execute workflow. Now, why I use manual a lot is for testing purposes, right? So sometimes I'll have a workflow that runs on a schedule, which is going to be our next one. And I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek, right? And we have that side of things. But, when testing it out, I might want to do execute workflow as well. So I'll have both of these attached. And it might puzzle you both. I thought, one trigger starts a workflow. Well, one of the cool things about triggers is you can actually have multiple triggers start a workflow. So like imagine you had again, we're just gonna use Google Sheets as an example over here. And let's just say we want to create a sheet, right? So what we can have is create a sheet, and guess what? You can connect multiple triggers to start off this workflow, which is really, really cool, right? So a very, very common use case for me at least is to have a schedule trigger right next to an execute workflow. On this one, the manual trigger, and it works really, really nice. So I'm just gonna click off both of these. I'm just gonna delete this for you guys as well, right? And you have that. Another purpose on the manual is like, imagine you have something that you wanna run like once a month, and there's not a set specific time. Like maybe you wanna run it on a Wednesday, maybe you wanna run it on a Friday. One day is at like 9 a.m., one day is at like 3 p.m., right? You're better off probably using this rather than a schedule trigger. Now the schedule trigger is a step up, right? So you can essentially set up a schedule to run this automatically. Now out of the gate, this is pretty nice because what you can see is you can set this on seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, or months, or you can set a custom, right, with your cron job. And you have to set up an expression like this, and it gives you the format on the side of things: second, minute, hour, day of month, day of week, right? Most of the time I'll be using something over here, right? Like if you go to days between trigger at a specific hour, right? Trigger at a specific minute, which makes it really, really nice. But again, if you want to really make this custom, you can do this. And just to explain like cron expressions, right? So something like this, right? 32 **1 run at 2:30 a.m. every Monday, right? So 30 minutes, 2 hours, right? Day of week 1 is going to be Monday. So that's why 2:30 on that side of things. Okay. Every day at midnight, right? So we'd have 0, 0, 3 stars. And then every day 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, every hour, you would have 0, 9-17, **1 through 5. So just some common stuff that you'll see. Star is any value, right? A comma is a list of values. Dash is a range of values. And then a slash is step values, right? And some examples over here: every 15 minutes, right? This is every minute, minutes 1 through 5, every 10 minutes. And honestly, you don't need to memorize this. To be honest with you guys, you can just send this into your favorite LLM and ask for a specific schedule if it's complicated, and it will give it to you. Obviously, you want to double check it before you put something like this into production, but a lot of this is like, it's not really worth memorizing this, right? LM should do a pretty good job on this side of things. So there is the schedule trigger. And again, this is really nice, like especially if you're going to do some sort of like database update or database additions, right? Maybe you want to do a schedule trigger on that side of things. And I'll give you an example, right? I had a customer that wanted to have different data populate within their database for social media profiles, right? They want to see the followers of these accounts every single day. So I just set a schedule trigger at 2 a.m. in the morning. It pulls all the different accounts from the database. It runs it through an Apify actor, and then it repopulates it. And there's a new row in the database every day associated with it. So, that is one common use case on the schedule trigger, right? There's a lot of those out there. All right, let's move into our next trigger. And this is going to be a form submission. And again, like I've done a lot of videos on form submissions here on the channel. And there's ways that you can improve this out as well. For at least n8n, form submission is kind of nice. So what you have over here, you can set a form title, a form description, and then you can add in different form elements, right? And I've covered this on some of the different scraping videos here on the channel. Unfortunately, I thought I'd put a link over here. I didn't. So I'm going to pause really quick and load up one of those. All right, I'm back. I have my form submission example over here for you guys. And this one was dealing with Apollo. And this was back in before Apify has their community node in cloud. So that's why you have this HTTP request. But essentially what I did on this one is I had a form submission, right? So we're trying to look for specific leads. So you have a job title over here, include similar titles, right? Location, organization, location. And well, again, with all these, like you can either set like a drop down, check boxes, custom HTML, file, hidden field. Like there's a lot here, right? And this honestly could be a video in itself on form submissions, right? But we have all this over here. If I click execute step, this is going to unpin and test. Hopefully it loads up. So you can see over here, Apollo Apify scraper, and this is our form, right? And when I fill out this information and I click submit, this starts this specific workflow, which is awesome, right? And what's nice too, is you can require specific fields, not require it. You can allow for multiple choices, right? And you can send that along within your workflow, right? What I put in this form submission, I ended up sending this over into an AI agent because to scrape Apollo leads, right? You have to have a specific URL, and it's easier just to use this AI agent on the side of things. And again, a little bit out of context for this video. Check out that video if you want to learn a little bit more about it, right? But ideally, like you can start your whole workflow when a form is submitted, right? On that. So you have your test URL, and then you also have your production URL. And one thing to note with like your production URL, right? That's not usable unless your workflow is set as active. Okay. now what we're going to do is jump into our webhook, and webhooks add a ton of flexibility into n8n, right? So essentially with a webhook, you can build out n8n workflows externally, right? You can have some sort of action happen within an application, and then it starts a workflow. And why a webhook is really nice, it just adds an extra layer of customization, right? So to give you guys an example, right, I built out a Streamlit application and I hooked up that Streamlit application into this webhook over here. And I have a full workflow on that side of things, again, in a video here on the channel too. I'll show you guys both of these on that. I'm actually gonna not move this workflow. Let's remove this really quick. Okay, cool. So here is my Streamlit n8n demo. So essentially on this side of things, right, I was getting an Instagram creator handle, right? And then I did some logic behind like how many posts an influencer wanted, the total budget for the campaign. And also like when I wanted to extract posts, I click compute and prepare payload, and then another button down below once it's just verified. And what I did is essentially send over this information right into n8n. And I apparently just opened the Streamlit app twice. I meant to go over here and load up the workflow. But you guys can see over here, right, once this loads. So what I have over here is this webhook that starts the workflow once this is submitted, right? And then it branches off, right? So there's two different sections of this that I wanted, right? Based off of posts and then some based off of the profile metrics, right? But the webhook starts this, and the submission into this webhook is external, right? It's outside of n8n. So I'll close these out and we'll jump into the next one. By the way, I am going to make a full video on webhooks here in the future. Again, I'll probably make a full video on form submission. Cool. Next is going to be chat. And, you know, chat's really popular if you're going to be working with a large language model here in n8n, right? And I'll just show you an example. Like this is what I built out when GPT-5 came out. So essentially you have a chat message over here, and then you can send it directly into an AI agent. So the prompt over here is going to be this JSON from the chat input on this side of things. And then you can load up your large language model, right? I just put OpenAI over here and I select GPT-5 mini as my model, right? Set up some memory, which is important on this side of things. So that way when I'm chatting with GPT-5, right, it knows it has some conversation history. And then I just added in a tool, and I use Perplexity because Perplexity allows me to get more real-time information just based off of, you know, GPT-5 is trained through 2024 summer, I want to say. It was like, what, May or June, somewhere around there, right? I'm probably a little bit off, and, you know, you can roast me if you want down below. But regardless, right, you would want to use a tool like that. And I have a video on that. But regardless, right, you would have this. And just to show you how this works, I'm just going to click Open Chat on this side of things. I'm going to ask a basic, you know, baseball question. So we'll say, when did Hank Aaron retire? So then it's going to go through over here, and I'll get a solution on this side of things, right? And again, a very, very basic question. Hank Aaron retired after the 1976 baseball season, MLB season. His final major league game was October 3rd, 1976, right? So what's cool about chat too is you actually get this pop-up down below over here. I guess pop-up is not technically the term, but you have this window that populates down below over here, and then you can just start having a conversation. And also, right, you can expand this out if you really wanted to. I don't know why I didn't expand out the first time, but you have that. And then if you want to hide your chat, you have that option as well. Again, very, very common use case when you're going to be working with an AI agent to use chat. Cool. So next is going to be external triggers with other apps, right? So, you know, you can connect the multiple different apps out there, and each of them have a ton of different triggers. I already covered, you know, HubSpot, for example, but, you know, Google Sheets has a trigger. HubSpot has a trigger. Gmail has a trigger. There's an email trigger over here. Slack also has a trigger. I mean, there's hundreds of triggers out there. And honestly, to go over each of them, like I'd rather have a specific video on Slack, a specific video on Google Sheets or Gmail, which I do believe I talked about the Gmail trigger in the Gmail video as well. But yeah, so you have all these on that side of things, right? And there's a lot of different settings you can change. You're going to typically have to set up some sort of credentials to get into these, like Gmail, to create a service account. HubSpot, you're gonna have to have like a developer account, if I remember correctly. Haven't done a Slack video yet, but that is gonna be in the pipeline as well. Cool, let's keep moving forward. Another one that's used a bit, and you wanna use this once you have workflows that are in production, is an error trigger. Now, what's really nice about an error trigger is it can let you know when other workflows have failed. So typically what happens is if a workflow fails, right, you can send it to a specific workflow that has an error trigger. And what's kind of interesting about the error trigger is by default, the error trigger workflow is going to be inactive, but it still allows it to operate. Whereas some other ones, you'd have to have it in that active state over here. But error workflow that starts with an error trigger can be inactive. And I do wonder if that's kind of based around the pricing, because n8n used to only allow you to have X amount of active workflows. And I'm sure people complain that an error trigger counted as one of those. So I wonder if that's the reasoning behind it. But just to show you, I fetched a test event before recording over here. So what you can have over here is like the URL, right? Error message, the node as well that errored out, the workflow ID. And there's a lot more that will populate here specifically in a real workflow instead of a fetch test event. And again, this is something I do plan on covering here in the future, right? Error trigger and how that works. Recently, what I did to build out one of these for a customer is I had any type of workflow that errored out sent into an error trigger. And then what it did is populate a table within Supabase, right? And there's some extra information here on that side of things. Cool. Another one on here that I haven't covered yet in a video, but I do plan on this, is a workflow being triggered by another workflow. So you can see that this is a node over here, and how this node operates, right? Once you have your workflow that hits this specific node, it goes into this trigger, which starts another workflow. And where this can be really helpful is if you have complicated workflows, right? So if something's really, really complicated, or if you use the same thing over and over again, right? And it's a repetitive block of nodes, and you say, hey, like multiple workflows can use it. Maybe you want to use this on that side of things. Again, this is in the backlog. Like I'll probably make a full 20-30 minute video talking about this and showing you guys examples. But that's like the basics behind it. And our last one, which I wanted to cover over here, is the MCP server. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol, and it's actually a newer technology, and a lot of companies are starting to adapt it on this side of things. What's really nice is you can set up a bunch of tools over here. So that when you're working with an AI agent, you only have to send in one. And that doesn't make a lot of sense if I don't show you guys this. So I'm just going to leave this over here and just kind of show you both. I do have a full video on MCP, which is about 30 minutes or so. It also talks about the limitations of n8n cloud versus self-host. What's also really cool is MCP is expanding quite a bit when it comes into the self-hosted section. But just to show you guys this example, right? Let's say I have an AI agent over here, and I have all of these tools, right? So I have some Gmail tools associated with it, right? And I have also this Think tool. Well, I can put all these in an MCP trigger, and then down below, all I need to have is this one specific MCP client, right? So then this MCP client goes over here and gets all these tools from this MCP server trigger, right? And there's two different sides of it: the test URL, right, which you would want to have execute step while using it, and you also have the production URL, which once you have this as active, anyone can access your MCP server trigger, even outside of n8n, right? So you can get this to run specifically in like an LLM of some sort, right? But this allows other people to have access to tools, right? And you can set up other stuff in over here as well. So, that's kind of it for the triggers, right? There's not really a ton out there. So just again to the cover, and I say there's not a ton out there. There's lots and lots of triggers out there, right? But different types of triggers, right? So we talked about over here the execute workflow and then the schedule trigger and kind of how you can pair these together, right? The manual process in comparison where this runs on some sort of cadence. We talked about a form submission. We talked also about webhook, how externally you can start a workflow with the webhook. Then chat message, if you're going to be using large language models, chat message is very, very popular way to start. Connections to specific apps, right? Like Google Sheets, HubSpot, Gmail, Slack, email over here. Error logging, right? The weird one where this is still inactive and it still works, right? And then executed by another workflow on this side of things. And then MCP. And again, to reiterate, like some of these, you need to have this in the active state for it to specifically work on its own, right? Otherwise, you're going to come across some issues. So like specifically like a webhook, right? A schedule trigger, like make sure that these are active and then they are good to go. And again, n8n doesn't charge you anymore based off of how many active workflows you have, which was the proper way to do it. Right now, you're getting charged on total amount of executions. Anyways, guys, thank you for checking out this video. I know it's a little bit of a longer one on the channel. If you like the content here, make sure to subscribe. Like well over 20 n8n videos now, and I'm going to keep on building them out. All right, catch you guys in another video.